NASCAR exhibition races have an identity crisis. In the decades following their inception, the purposes of the Busch Light Clash and All-Star Race remained fairly straightforward. But after several years of mediocre racing in the mid to late 2010s, NASCAR decided to drastically overhaul both these events to varying degrees of success. So let's take a deeper look at how these events were created, how they gained their reputations, and how they ended up in the states that they're in today. The Clash was NASCAR's first annual exhibition race, created in 1979. The original purpose of this exhibition race was to highlight pole award winners from the previous season by putting them all into a 20-lap preseason sprint. Okay, it was actually developed as a way to promote the new Busch brand, but that's way less interesting. But by having it be a short, no pit stop race to the finish featuring only pole award winners, they could brand it as the fastest race of the season. At first, this was heralded as a pretty good idea. It helped expand the Speed Weeks catalog for NASCAR at Daytona, and it incentivized drivers to give it all they had in every race's qualifying sessions. And it also made fans want to watch more qualifying sessions throughout the season, as they were just beginning to be shown on national television. And for the first 12 iterations of this race, this format would stay exactly the same. Meanwhile, in the mid-80s, RJ Reynolds and the Winston cigarette brand were searching for new ways to advertise their products. And so they turned to NASCAR to create a new exhibition race known simply as the Winston, which would be held in their own backyard at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, just 90 minutes down the road from RJR's headquarters in Winston-Salem. An odd choice since North Wilkesboro is actually closer to Winston than Charlotte, but I guess they just wanted to draw as large of a crowd as possible, and few tracks could hold as many fans as Charlotte in the 80s. After a successful first outing in 1985, NASCAR and RJR opted to move the event to Atlanta Motor Speedway in 86. But after an incredibly lackluster crowd of only 18,000, they decided it would be best to leave the event in Charlotte. Moving into the 90s, while the Busch Clash at Daytona would finally move to a segmented format in 1991 to keep the race exciting, since restrictor plates had dampened the excitement of the race since their introduction in 1988, I know, how dare they keep the cars in the ground. The race still remained fairly popular with the fan base who were just eager to see cars back on the track after a gruelingly long 3-month offseason. Man, NASCAR fans truly have it the worst. Meanwhile, in the early 90s, the Winston was losing steam in the eyes of the fan base. In both 1990 and 1991, the pole sitter ran away with the events, leading all of the laps. Facing potential cancellation in 1992, legendary promoter Humpy Wheeler thought of a brilliant idea. The first super speedway to be completely lit up at night. Remember, super speedway used to mean something a lot different than it means now. Under the bright night lights with an extra segment added, the 1992 Winston was an all-time classic that saw drivers like Dale Earnhardt, Davey Allison, and Kyle Petty give it their all for the cash prize. This ushered in what many would consider to be the golden age of all-star races. While it did include a few stinkers, most would say that between 1992 and 2009, the All-Star Race was a can't-miss event. Fun fact, by the way, the name All-Star Race was actually first used in NASCAR Thunder 2003, since Winston branding wasn't allowed to be used in a video game targeted at children. Once Nextel took over sponsorship in 2004, the real-life name of the race would be changed to the All-Star to reflect the video games. Just more evidence that the NASCAR Thunder games were peak. But as the All-Star Race gained traction among fans in the 2000s, the Busch Clash, now known as the Bud Shootout, began to lose a bit of its luster. Starting in 2009 due to Coors taking over as the title sponsor of the Pole Award, polls would no longer be used to determine who made it into the shootout. Gone were the days of NASCAR personalities stepping on stage to draw their starting spot out of a Budweiser can while having some funny banter with Kenny Wallace and the other Speed Channel hosts. Well, except for Joey Logano, who was actually too young to drink, so Greg Zipadelli had to draw for him in 2009. That was kinda funny. Now qualifying for the Clash, or Shootout, was based on a weird system of top drivers from each manufacturer in the field, increasing the number of entries to 28. Wait, that's basically every competitive car in the field! You just took out the back markers! And in 2012, the field was expanded again to include the top 25 in points. Plus anybody who had ever won any Cup Series event at Daytona, making 34 drivers eligible to run. And with the event now being expanded from 20 laps to 75, it was clear what was happening to the Clash. It was no longer a sprint among NASCAR's fastest drivers. Except for the years that it was called the Sprint Unlimited. God, what a terrible name. It was a glorified extra test session for the Daytona 500. Meanwhile, the All-Star Race was suffering from a similar fate as they tried to throw more and more gimmicks at it to keep the hype alive from the 90s and 2000s. With every passing year feeling more and more complicated, the All-Star Race also began to lose some prestige. And in the mid-2010s, the infamous Gen 6 car would be the nail in the coffin for both events as we knew them. While the later iterations of the Gen 6 car produced phenomenal superspeedway racing with incredibly fast closing rates, it also led to far more wrecks on superspeedways than ever before. And now that we'd entered NASCAR's cost-cutting era, that simply wasn't going to fly anymore. Especially in the 2019 Clash, where drivers just rode around in a straight line for the entire race, only to crash right at the end just before the rains hit. And in 2020, where basically the entire field crashed so many times that Eric Jones went to victory lane in a car that... Actually, I'll let Mike Joy do this one.
Eric Jones is going to win the Busch Clash with a car that's ready for the dumpster.
And with NASCAR cutting the Gen 6 car's horsepower after 2014, intermediate racing became so bad that no amount of all-star gimmicks was going to save it. They tried everything. Short segments, long segments, option tires, restrictor plate racing. The godforsaken 2016 Brad Keselowski format with more rules than I have oxygen to explain properly. Absolutely nothing could produce a compelling all-star race. So, in 2020, in the middle of a raging pandemic, NASCAR took their golden opportunity to shake things up. First, the all-star race would be moved to Bristol, one of the few tracks still allowing fans to attend during COVID. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And in 2021, the Busch Clash would move to the Daytona Road Course. Since Gen 6 road racing was still fairly popular among fans, and a lot cheaper than crashing 25 cars in the high banks again. While the finish was exciting with Chase Elliott taking out Ryan Blaney only to give it away to Kyle Busch, this version of the Clash was far less interesting than the old one to most fans. Especially since the Daytona Road Course had just been run in the summer of 2020, the Rolex 24, and again for another points race in only 2 weeks. The Daytona Road Course just got very overused very quickly, to the point where it wasn't really fascinating anymore. And after a lackluster Bristol All-Star race, SMI decided, well, it can't get any worse than this, let's just go to Texas. But at least in 2022, NASCAR cooked up a brilliant idea. What if we ran the Clash in the LA Memorial Coliseum? In a way, this race could be an homage to NASCAR's roots, running around quarter-mile bull rings like in the 50s and 60s, but would take place in an exciting new venue that appeals to the casual fan. While it stunk to have Daytona Speedway shortened, I think after the last 3 clashes, people were pretty keen on the idea of moving to another venue. And the result was a pretty good first year, and then in 2023 and 2024, it became, oh my god, this race is actually so terrible, why are we doing this? It didn't help that chasing the casual fan seemed to only really work in year 1, as the fickle LA sports fans barely returned to the stands in the following 2 years, making for some pretty bad TV optics. In fairness, yes, 2024's race was moved up a whole day due to weather concerns, but 2023 went off without a hitch, and it was still half empty. And meanwhile, after 2 years of floundering in Texas, in 2023, NASCAR and SMI made the radical decision to move the All-Star race to the newly reopened North Wilkesboro Speedway, creating a Field of Dreams sort of event. So one exhibition could appeal to casual fans, and one could appeal to old school fans. But ultimately they appealed to neither because next-gen short track racing is terrible. And now, in 2025, we have this weird imbalance where both exhibition races are being held at historic North Carolina venues like Bowman Gray and North Wilkesboro. Now, I'll be the first to say, as a Winston-Salem boy myself, I am very much looking forward to both of these events, regardless of what the racing product looks like. But I do have to wonder, does a Bowman Gray Clash appeal to anybody else outside of this area? I mean, sure, it's historic, it's cool to see NASCAR come back to this storied venue, but that was the All-Star Races bit. We've already seen it. I'm not even convinced this was NASCAR's first plan of action after the Coliseum. I'm convinced that this was like Plan E after A, B, C, and D were all off the table. Maybe it was Plan Z, who even knows? I'm sure it makes the teams happy at least. I mean, RFK had to drive out to California all 3 years and only made the race with just Brad Keselowski last year. That had to suck for them. And same goes for the teams who travel all the way out to the Texas All-Star race, only to miss the main event and get paid basically nothing. Going up to Bowman Gray or Wilkesboro is probably a lot nicer to the team's wallets. But it almost feels like NASCAR has done a little too much with these exhibition races. Daytona Speed Weeks feels more like Speed 4 days without the Clash. And hey, intermediate racing is actually pretty good now, so why not put the All-Star race back at Charlotte? And again, this is coming from somebody who is extremely happy to have North Wilkesboro and Bowman Gray on the schedule. I just don't think this appeals to the most fans. Wilkesboro does need a points race though, let me be clear about that. If NASCAR still wanted to do a cool exhibition to attract casuals, then why not have a third exhibition during the offseason like they did in Japan in the mid-90s? There's so much buzz about NASCAR wanting to bring their products to new audiences overseas or in big American cities, and, well, they've proven that they can do both already. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure what NASCAR's best course of action is. They held the Clash in all-star races at Daytona and Charlotte for decades, and, well, after a while, it just didn't work anymore. So why would they want to go back? But at the same time, the traditions and identities of these events have been so eroded over time that they almost seem pointless the more they get moved around. So I'll pass this question off to you. Would you like to see these events go back to the way they used to be, or do you want NASCAR to keep mixing things up? Let me know in the comment section down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.